They're called to be separate, to be a peculiar people, if you will. They're called to be different. They're called to live these holy lives, and they've got a new allegiance. And so as they do that, the question, and I think the reason that Peter is writing this is because the question that immediately came up was, well, I've got a new king. Christ is my authority now. I don't have to follow the king anymore. And Peter's contradicting that. I've got this new authority. I don't have to follow my boss anymore. I can quit my job and do whatever. Peter says, no, that's not the right answer. You need to stay in this situation and show Christ even in that situation. I mean, Paul wrote about the same things, right? What did he write to the Thessalonians? A lot of people were quitting their work because now they're looking forward to the second coming. And he says, no, don't do that. You got to work. If you don't work, you don't eat. So that's a message that is consistent from both of them. And so, and in the case that we're going to look at today is kind of the same situation. I've given my life to Christ. Why would I stay with an ungodly husband, if you will? So those are the questions we're going to look at. But we're going to see, we back up here, we're going to look in John 13, this idea, the submission that Christ demonstrated, that Peter was front and center for. And it's just a fun little story from Peter's life. And we're not going to spend a whole lot of time, but just kind of in the background as we think about submission and we think about the way Christ lived his life. And yeah, we've looked at what Peter said about Christ giving himself to death, right? But this is a story of Christ washing the feet of his disciples. Certainly a role that you wouldn't expect the teacher, right, the rabbi to do, the one in authority to do. But here we are, John chapter 13, starting in verse 1. Now before the feast of the Passover, when Jesus knew that his hour had come, that he should depart from this world to the Father, having loved his own who were in the world, he loved them to the end. And supper being ended, the devil having already put it into the heart of Judas Iscariot, Simon's son, to betray him, Jesus, knowing that the Father had given all things into his hands, and that he had come from God and was going to God, rose from supper, laid aside his garments, took a towel, and girded himself. After that, he poured water into a basin and began to wash the disciples' feet and to wipe them with the towel with which he was girded. Then he came to Simon Peter. Now, we've been looking at a lot of stories from Peter's life, so of course we're going to see Peter speak up here. And he came to Simon Peter. Peter said to him, Lord, are you washing my feet? Jesus answered and said to him, what I am doing, you do not understand now, but you will know after this. As we look at Peter's life, we see the transformation that occurs throughout his life. And this is one of those situations where Jesus says, you don't understand it yet. You don't understand the idea of humility and submission in the way that you need to just yet, but you will. And Peter said to him, verse 8, you shall never wash my feet. Jesus answered him, if I do not wash you, you have no part with me. So Simon Peter said to him, Lord, not my feet only, but also my hands and my head. I just love the attitude that Peter displays there. He doesn't understand what's happening or the lesson that's being taught at the moment. He initially says, you're not supposed to wash my feet. Like, this is not your role, certainly. But Jesus is humbling himself here. He's serving here. And he says, if I don't wash your feet, you have no part in me. And Peter's response is kind of humorous. Oh, well, don't stop there then. I want to have such a big part in you. Don't stop at my feet. Wash my whole body. Jesus said to him, he who is bathed needs only to wash his feet, but is completely clean. And you are clean, but not all of you, for he knew who would betray him. Therefore he said, you are not all clean. So when he had washed their feet, taken his garments, and sat down again, he said to them, do you know what I have done to you? You call me teacher and Lord, and you say, well, for so I am. If I then, your Lord and teacher, have washed your feet, you also ought to wash one another's feet. For I've given you an example that you should do as I have done to you. Most assuredly, I say to you, a servant is not greater than his master, nor is he who sent greater than the one who sent him. If you know these things, blessed are you if you do them. Jesus is teaching a powerful lesson here that Peter is front and center for, that I think somewhat relates to what we're talking about today. You can put yourself in a position of submission to someone else. It doesn't mean you're less than. It simply means you're following Christ's example and his instruction to serve others. So I think that's a good kind of background for what we're looking at this morning. So with that, let's go into 1 Peter chapter 3. We're going to try to cover verses 1 through 12 in the last 10 or 15 minutes we have here. Let me just read through it. 1 Peter chapter 3. In the same way, so keep that in mind here, in the same way or likewise, so you can see how it relates to what we've just been talking about. In the same way, you wives, be submissive to your own husbands, so that even if any of them are disobedient to the word, they may be won without a word by the behavior of their wives, as they observe your chaste and respectful behavior. Your adornment must not be merely external, braiding the hair and wearing gold jewelry or putting on dresses, but let it be the hidden person of the heart, with the imperishable quality of a gentle and quiet spirit, which is precious in the sight of God. For in this way, in former times, the holy women also, who hoped in God, used to adorn themselves, being submissive to their own husbands, just as Sarah obeyed Abraham, calling him Lord, and you have become her children if you do what is right without being frightened by any fear. You husbands, in the same way, live with your wives in an understanding way, as with someone weaker, since she is a woman, and show her honor as a fellow heir of the grace of life, so that your prayers will not be hindered. To sum up, all of you, be harmonious, sympathetic, brotherly, kind-hearted, and humble in spirit, not returning evil for evil or insult for insult, but giving a blessing instead. For you were called for the very purpose that you might inherit a blessing. For the one who desires life, to love and see good days, must keep his tongue from evil and his lips from speaking deceit. He must turn away from evil and do good. He must seek peace and pursue it. For the eyes of the Lord are toward the righteous, and his ears attend to their prayer, but the face of the Lord is against those who do evil. All right, so that's the passage that we're going to really spend the rest of our time looking at this morning. And it starts off with this idea, wives, submit to your husbands. And again, the fact that it starts there with likewise or within the same way should reflect back to what we just studied. So just like we said, we need to be submitting to government authorities. We need to be submitting to masters or to those who hold some kind of authority over us. And then he says the reason we do that is because we are demonstrating Christ's submission. We are acting like Christ. That's the way that chapter ended up. And then he says, likewise, just like Christ submitted himself in these situations, wives, submit to your husbands. Wives, be submissive to your own husbands. All right, so like I said, now we've got the ladies' class in here. My own wife is sitting right there. I'll be honest. This is one of those things. The roles of husbands and wives in the household is one of those things that we've had a lot of discussions on. We've had to work hard for. If you guys know, my personality is perhaps one that would rather take the back seat in a lot of cases. And Connie's personality is one that perhaps would rather try to be, how do I say this? I don't know. I'm not going to come out of this well. Look, the bossy announcement. Okay. We joked when we were going through premarital counseling that Mars and Venus were a little bit backwards with us in some cases. I did. But I just want to just get it out there. But that's a situation. So like I said, some couples may struggle more with that than others, and this is one that we have worked hard on over the years. But it starts out talking about the idea of a wife submitting herself not just to a godly husband, which is one thing, right? But it starts out talking about wives submitting themselves to an unbelieving husband. That's what the first couple of verses here in chapter 3 are talking about. Submit to your own husbands, so that even if any of them are disobedient to the word. Okay, what does that mean? To be disobedient to the word. They're unbelieving, right? They don't follow God. So again, this goes back to the situation that many of these early Christians found themselves in that says, I follow Christ now, but why would I surround myself with people who don't? And what if those people are in your own household? What if you've already made a vow to stay with this person, and yet nonetheless, that person does not hold to Christ in the same way you do? That is the context that Peter is making this instruction. So it's even worse than Paul gives instructions a lot of times to wives submitting to their husbands, and a lot of times you can kind of see that in the context of in a godly family, there's this mutual respect and edification. Here Peter's talking about a situation where you're even in a situation where the family is the husband is not godly, he is disobedient. But Peter gives a reason for being submissive even to that situation. What is the reason that Peter gives? Why would a wife be encouraged to submit to someone who is not a believer? that they may, I think I heard it, that they may be won by the behavior of their wife. Now, how can a wife win over their husbands just based on her behavior? What's that look like? Okay, setting a good example. And that's the kind of the bullet I've got here. Be an example to the unbelieving husband, that they may be won by without a word by the behavior of their wives. Sometimes wives, you might think, look, I need to be like nagging him to go to church with me, or I need to be preaching at him every day. And maybe there are opportunities where that may come up. I'm not saying that may not be appropriate in some cases. But Peter's saying, look, you need to live a godly life so that the husband looks at you and says, there's something different about you, right? We've been married all this time, and now something has changed, and I recognize it in you. You're no longer the same person you were. Now you're living this, he says, they observe your chaste and respectful behavior. That's the kind of behavior that is being encouraged here, chaste, respectful behavior. The husband would recognize the change in her behavior and wonder, what's going on here? And that's where it kind of opens up the door there, that the wife could then provide this opportunity for the husband to be saved. But Paul writes similar things in 1 Corinthians 7, doesn't he? He encourages wives with unbelieving spouses to stay with them, that they might be won. So it's the same kind of message between Paul and Peter both when it comes to wives with unbelieving husbands. But you can kind of see how that might work. All right, any comments on that, or any other recommendations? We got a lot more ladies here than we usually have. Are there other ways that you think that might be applicable to be able to win an unbelieving husband over just with your behavior? Yeah, Tammy. Okay. Yes, the question, if he's telling them to do that, can we infer that they were not doing that? And again, I think the implication here is that, or maybe the inference here is that many were saying, look, I can't be with this guy anymore because we don't see eye to eye on this most important critical issue. I think that is an inference that you can make, is that people were perhaps even leaving these relationships, or thinking, now we've got freedom in Christ. And Peter was kind of talking about that. You have freedom, but then he says, use that freedom to do good. And in this context, that means living this chaste and respectful life. Yeah, Carrie? What's that? No, I think that's I think that goes to what Paul writes in 1 Corinthians 7. He says, don't leave your husband. Yeah. He says, no, you need to stay. And then Peter says, be a good example, right, in that live a righteous life, right? That's I think what we're seeing here when you put the two together, right? Peter, I think, kind of implies that no, you stay and you win him over through your good actions, your good attitude, your good, right. I mean that seems to be, you continue to live this way, and it's funny, the way God works. I've seen it happen. I've seen, people in a similar situation where the husband, yeah, Connie knows who I'm talking about, where the husband is, I don't know how old he was, 80, 78? Okay, the couple have been married 55 years. It was a similar situation. He was 78 years old, and he obeyed the gospel. So I would say continue to do what the scripture says, and it's amazing the power of God. Yeah, go ahead. Yeah. Yeah. Mm-hmm. Yeah. But he kind of sums things up in all of these things. If you look at verse 8, chapter 3 and verse 8, and again, I'm reading from the NASB, and he uses the words to sum up. Yeah. To summarize, he says. To summarize, it seems to me, all of the things he's been talking
about these authorities and so forth, submitting to authorities. We're to be different from the world.
Yeah.
The world doesn't do things like this, but we as Christians need to do things like this. And he says in verse 8, to sum up all of these things, again, it seems to me, all of them be harmonious, sympathetic, loving, compassionate, and humble. And I'll keep reading verse 9, because I think it kind of gives an answer to what Carrie just asked. Not returning evil for evil or insult for insult. By the way, that's what the world does.
Yeah.
The world returns evil for evil, insult for insult. We men have always been told if somebody does something to you got to do it back.
Right, right.
The world does it, but that's not the way we as Christians do.
Yeah.
And he continues on. But giving a blessing instead, he says. For you were called for this very purpose, that you would inherit a blessing.
Yeah. So
it seems to me, and I'm not a wife, obviously, but it seems to me the wife that stays with her unbelieving husband all those years, even if he doesn't submit, ever.
Yeah.
She inherits a blessing.
That's right.
We all can inherit this blessing, okay?
Yeah.
If we live in the manner that Peter is describing here.
Yeah.
That's what we're looking forward to inherit that blessing that we've been given and are guaranteed through the death of Christ.
That's right. Yeah, that's it. That's a great point, Rolf. Kind of skipped to the punchline there. The summary there is you live this certain way, have these attitudes. And this is true for everybody, husbands, wives, doesn't matter. You have these attitudes that we looked at there, being harmonious, be of one mind is the way some translations put it. Looking out for one another, and ultimately there is a blessing that you receive when you don't return evil for evil, but you do good, you live these godly lives. There is a reward for that, for staying there and being diligent. I know that was the first bell, so I may not even get to the husband part of this. What a shame. But yeah, go ahead, Carla. Yeah. That's right. Okay. He became good, and somebody had an influence on that, right? Somebody. You can, yeah. 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 So you can see the diligent, continue to be that example. Okay. Yeah. So the next couple of verses talk about women adorning themselves. Peter says, your adornment must not be merely external, braiding the hair, wearing gold jewelry, putting on dresses. Let me pause there. Does that mean ladies shouldn't dress up and look nice? Yeah. No, it goes on, right? It's not so much a focus on the external. I think his point is you should focus less on the external and more on the internal, right? If you continue reading, not merely the external, but let it be the hidden person of the heart with the imperishable quality of a gentle and quiet spirit, which is precious in the sight of God. That's what wives are instructed to be adorned with, if you will, a gentle spirit, a quiet spirit. And this kind of goes back to how, and I think this goes beyond to this is not just if you've got an ungodly husband. I think this is just what wives are instructed to be, not to be gaudy and just, I'm just, as long as I, just arm candy for my husband, I've satisfied the requirement. That's not the point. It should not be the point of being a good wife, right? That's not the goal. The goal is to have these internal qualities, gentleness, quiet spirit. All right, and then as we wrap up the wives portion of this, he goes and says, be like Sarah as she obeyed Abraham. As far as the obedience and the honor that she paid to Abraham. So 5 and 6, for in this way in former times the holy women also who hoped in God used to adorn themselves, being submissive to their own husbands, just as Sarah obeyed Abraham, calling him Lord, and you have become her children if you do what is right without being frightened by any fear. So what do you guys remember about Abraham and Sarah? I don't remember a whole lot of examples about that, but the biggest story we remember from Sarah is her laughing, I think, when she was told about having a child in her old age. And it's actually, I think, that very, very passage that Peter is referencing. If you Genesis chapter 18, verse let's see. Verse 12, Sarah laughed to herself, saying, "After I've become old, shall I have pleasure, my Lord being old also?" So even in this case, where she wasn't talking directly to him, she was having this almost internal dialogue that the Lord knew. She's still referring to Abraham as her Lord, or her master, some translations say. So even in that situation, she found it humorous. She laughed about this idea, but she was still paying him respect. And it's interesting to me that Peter kind of pulls from that and says, we often talk about being children of Abraham, and he says you could be like a daughter of Sarah if you follow in this pattern. So that was the second bell. Any last questions, comments? I wasn't going to leave the husbands off the hook. I've got plenty to say there too, but go ahead, Kenny. Yeah. Sure. Yeah. Yeah. I think you're exactly right. If you're not married yet, you want to get married to a Christian. I think that's absolutely the case. The instructions here for those, what do you do in a situation where you're already married to somebody and you become a Christian? I think that's where that message is. But you're absolutely right. Yeah, it's a whole different message for those who are not yet married. All right. Well, that's all the time we have. Appreciate the comments. Very good discussion. Thank you, guys.